peaches, you don't have to have a pollinator with any of the peaches or nectarines that are here. There is one variety of peach that requires a pollinator, but you just don't see it around anymore. And so don't worry about it. They are all self-fruitful, only need one fruit. What we mean by needing a pollinator, if they need a pollinator, they need two varieties of fruit, so that each will pollinate the other. If you have a whole row of the same variety, they won't pollinate. And some things that will pollinate fine in a milder climate like California won't pollinate here because of our cold spring climate. And so you need, with some things, you need two different varieties. Now, none of the peaches or the nectarines are in that class. Now, we jump over here to the apples and to most of the apricots and the cherries and the pears and the plums. You need a pollinator. And so, with a couple of exceptions, some of the modern cherries don't need a pollinator, but most of them will set heavier if you have some other variety. It doesn't have to be right next to each other. It can be in the same block, even in the same two blocks. The bees do a good job of pollinating, and if you have one fairly close, then you'll get a good set of fruit, and you don't have to worry about it. And so now with apricots, they all need a pollinator except Chinese. It's self-fruitful. That's the variety, also called the Mormon apricot, which will set fruit even in our unpredictable cold weather in the spring. Because if they come out with blossoms and then you get a hard freeze, meaning it gets down below about 30 degrees, then it'll kill all the blossoms. You won't have a crop. Whereas with the Chinese apricot, ours sets every year. It oversets. We've never had a year when we haven't had a good crop. And so if you're going to plant an apricot, ours is a good quality apricot, and you never have to worry about them freezing. So that's a good one. With the apples, I'll just single out a few. I think the best applesauce apple, by bar none, is a Gravenstein. And anyone who writes on the subject will tell you the same thing. If you tried everything, the Gravenstein is head and shoulders above everything else for applesauce. So if you can plant a Gravenstein or two in your yard, that's very helpful. They do need a pollinator. They're pollen sterile. They will not pollinate anything else either. But if you have one in the neighborhood of a Golden Delicious or Red Delicious or Fuji or something else, then it gets pollinated just fine. And ours just has a Fuji, which is not a particularly good pollinator, but it does just fine with the Gravenstein. Now, the two most popular modern apples, because they taste the best and because they store the longest, are Honeycrisp and Fuji. And I have a publication that tells the varieties of apples being planted in Washington. Those are the leading two varieties being planted in the state of Washington because they're the best tasting and store the best. Now, the regular Fuji around here doesn't ripen until you get into mid-October. And some years when we have an early October and an early fall, they don't ripen very well. And in fact, what the leading producer of apples in this area is All Ribs Orchard, and his are not for sale until the 1st of November. Why is that? Because he gets them dead ripe on the tree, so they'll taste good. Now, I would recommend an early Fuji instead of the regular, because it'll ripen 3 weeks earlier, so it'll get ripe every year by the end of September. And I've listed two there. Auville Early Fuji and September Wonder Fuji are both early, 3 weeks earlier, and they're excellent taste, excellent quality, excellent storing, and they get ripe in time. So for a home orchard, those would be better than the other Fuji. Now, going down, we've talked about apricots, cherries I've listed, good pollinator. For example, being without a pollinator, you just don't get a crop, so you need another kind. Utah Giant will pollinate a being, but Rainier and Stella and Craig's Crimson pollinate it better. And those are all good tasting. Remember, the bottom of Montmorency is a tart cherry. And now, in terms of the pears, you know Bartlett and red Bartlett. The Bartlett are more susceptible to flower blight, and so if you don't want to worry about that, plant a D'Anjou or a Flemish Beauty as a pollinator for the D'Anjou.